Good evening, everyone. We're going to give about 30 more seconds to let everybody trickle in, and then we'll get started. Thank you so much for being here. All right, for the sake of everybody's time, I am going to be prompt and we're going to get started here. So again, thank you so much for being here. My name is Alyson Campbell and I am a college planning consultant with Estrela Consulting out of Northeast Ohio. We work with students all over the US and the world as well, but happy to have three excellent presenters tonight to introduce us to the world of esports. So I'm going to read a little bit off of a script just to make sure that I introduce everybody properly. So give me one second. And I am first going to introduce you to Nate Meeker, who is the Director of Esports at the University of Akron in Akron, Ohio. Nate has 15 years worth of experience in the field, developing programs, creating curriculum, and teaching content. Nate has worked at the University of Akron for 7 years while developing their esports program. And prior to that, he developed curriculum and worked as an education professor at various other colleges in the US, Korea, and Japan. So welcome, Nate.
Thank you, Allison. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. So next up, we have Dr. Glenn Platt, who is the C. Michael Armstrong Professor of Emerging Technology at Miami University. After receiving his undergraduate degree from the University of Florida and his master's and PhD from Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, he joined Miami University, where he founded the Emerging Technology in Business and Design. He also led the creation of the nationally ranked game design program, the first Division I varsity esports program, Miami's Bay Area Entrepreneurship Program, and graduate programs in tech entrepreneurship, as well as the esports management program. Miami has been ranked the #1 university for esports. Glenn is the creator of the Flipped Classroom, one of the most impactful shifts in education in the last 20 years, and is the past president of the International Digital Media and Arts Association and president of Voice, which is Voice of Intercollegiate Esports, a nonprofit advocacy organization. Glenn has presented at SXSW twice, as well as TEDx, and consults with Fortune 500 companies about games and business. Glenn is presently writing a book about actionable gamification for businesses and is the co-founder of the Lyceum AI, an EdTech AI solution for classroom use. So welcome, Glenn.
Thanks. I will have one correction. That when we wrote that, I was president of Voice, but actually the president of Voice of Intercollegiate Esports now is Dan Clerkey. If you guys know Dan from Maryville University, arguably one of the best esports programs in the country. So he deserves that shout out.
Well, thank you. You've passed the torch effectively. So thank you. Last but not least, we have rounding out our panel tonight is Sam Shelfout, who is an assistant professor of sport management and the director of the Club Esports program at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. He manages a group of roughly 50 students in competitive and non-competitive offerings in titles such as Valorant, Overwatch, and League of Legends, Rocket League, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. In addition to his background in sport history, his academic research explores the overlap between esports and interdisciplinary sport studies. He holds a PhD in physical culture and sports studies from the University of Texas at Austin and is a former competitive Hearthstone player. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
All right, so tonight's agenda, we're going to learn just a brief general overview of what is esports. I'm going to leave this mostly to the professionals, but again, we're just going to briefly touch upon it. We're going to talk about, are you an e-athlete or an e-competitor? So I'm not sure what terminology you prefer to use, but identifying who could be an e-competitor. What is your potential? What opportunities are available for you at this level? And then we're going to dive into meeting the programs and the professionals behind these programs. So we'll be able to ask some more in-depth questions and get to know them, their background, and kind of what makes their particular program special. And then if you have any Q&A, go ahead and drop it into the chat. Our moderators will go ahead and look at some of those things. If you have a specific question for one of our presenters, go ahead and just address their name to that. We'll try to answer those all at the end. If we run out of time, I'm sure you can reach out via email, or you can drop your email for them to reach back out to you. So again, should go pretty smooth tonight, but we are excited and welcome all of your questions or comments. So what is esports? I am a former college athlete, but not in the esports world. And this was so interesting for me to learn a little bit more about what this is and honestly to understand the scope of what esports is. And I was talking to someone this morning about it, and they were like, do you know how big a market esports is? I'm like, I had no idea, but now I do. So I'm excited to hear more about that. Essentially, it's organized competitive gaming, and it's set up with players, teams, and leagues. We're going to hear a little bit more about the leagues and the setups that these programs have. It is watched and enjoyed by spectators. So there is a market for this. People are watching and following, and there is a lot of money involved in this market. Some of the popular games that you may recognize are Rocket League, Valorant, League of Legends, Fortnite. I feel like I know Fortnite because I have a couple fourth graders. I've heard of Fortnite quite a bit, and Overwatch. And to be fair, I don't even know how to turn on my gaming console at my house. So again, I'm looking forward to hearing more about this from you, but I feel like I've heard some of the names of these and I know how popular they are. And this, I feel like, is a staggering statistic. The global market size is expected to increase from, I got to move your head, sorry, 2.3 billion in 2023 to 16.7 billion in 10 years. So that is incredible. As far as college esports, again, this is growing immensely. And I've been on a number of college visits, and they'll be like, do you want to check out our esports arena? Do you want to see our esports complex? Which is just fascinating to me, that over 260 colleges in the US and Canada currently carry a form of collegiate varsity esports. It is not an NCAA sanctioned sport. It has a governing body of its own, which is the NACE, the National Association for College Esports. And according to their statistics, there are over 5,000 participants at the collegiate level at their member organization. So again, quite the footprint for esports at the college level. There are varsity and club options. So both of the, well, we have two of our presenters tonight. We'll talk a little bit about their varsity programs. Sam's going to talk a little bit more about the club side of it. So again, no matter what level of expertise, intensity, commitment that you have towards this, there are opportunities out there for you to compete at the collegiate level. And what's really enticing about this, and I know if you're a parent on this and you're listening, there are scholarships for esports. So for those of you that have been on your students about spending too much time playing video games and needing to spend more time on their schoolwork or their academics, there could be a payoff in this. There are scholarships ranging from $500 to full tuition, which is incredible. And I'm going to ask our presenters to talk a little bit more about how this works at their institutions. But on average, according to the NACE statistics, it's around $2,000 a year. So that's significant, especially, $2,000 a year, $8,000 overall for your commitment to esports. That is really a great opportunity that shouldn't be overlooked. So should I be considering esports? If you are someone who is watching this webinar, again, you're maybe trying to, you're like, I really love gaming and I'm really intense at it. I'm very skilled at it. Is this something that could be something I do at the next level? Something that we always talk about at Estrela, no matter what you are looking to pursue, whether you're, again, looking into esports or maybe collegiate athletics or theater or music or some other sort of talent or just going to school, you need to be a strong student. Like that needs to be first and foremost, your recruitability. So if a coach is looking at you to bring you on, but you're really struggling with your academics, maybe you are not a great time manager, maybe you're really, really sucked into the gaming side of it and not taking school as seriously, that's kind of a red flag. So making sure that there is some balance and that you are prioritizing your academics above this. The ability to create content, and I'll have the guys speak to this as well. I did notice that, something that was helpful in this recruitment process was maybe creating like a Twitch account, and that allows for you to upload content. If you are nationally ranked, like putting together some sort of like resume or like player profile that can show some of your accolades and kind of where you're ranked. Creating a highlight reel, the same thing. And again, working towards some of those ranking and competitive wins. So perhaps if you have questions about that, that may be a great question to ask in the chat. Like, how do I get entered into tournaments? How do I make myself more, like to stand out in this crowd a little bit more? And then there's also some strengths. And Glenn, I listened to your TED Talk and it was so interesting, and I'm definitely going to ask you more about it. But the strengths and like the different types of skills that are required and that are gained through esports is really, really incredible to me. But esports competitors or athletes are typically really strong strategic thinkers. They are quick to move, they are analytical, they're just strong decision makers. They have strong perceptual skills, so the ability obviously to have really strong senses and be able to react very quick. You can see things visually. Your muscle fibers are firing because you have to react and be very ready to go at all times. Strong motor skills. And like any athlete, whether again it's esports or a ball, a field, a court sport, you need to have practice and determination. You need to be able to dedicate time to honing your craft and improving, and also balancing that with the ability to be a good student as well. So showing that type of balance again will be something that is, will make you successful in all aspects, but will make you a strong candidate for an esports program. So again, I want to reintroduce the 3 schools that we have representing us tonight: the University of Akron, Miami University, and Sacred Heart University. So I've prepared a few questions for them, and our presenters are ready to go. But we're going to start with the University of Akron, and again, led by Nate Meeker. And I will just read through this real quickly, and then I will have you just, Nate, if you have anything to add about this, please do.
Sure.
So they do offer a varsity JV and club level. They have 2,400 students at all levels, which is incredible. And just some of the limited research that I was doing and looking to see who I could ask to present on this panel, that is a lot of students. So I'm anxious to have you talk a little bit more about those numbers. Are you recruiting that many? Or are people just kind of finding you? Again, you can see the top games there. Again, this means nothing to me because I don't even know how to turn on a console, but I would love for you to talk about just which games are there games that are particularly popular, or everybody has these, or maybe these are ones that are very specific to your club. And then they do have scholarships available. So that is an awesome avenue for college affordability, plus 60 scholarships for students who are looking to work in esports. So Nate, I would love at some point for you to elaborate on that. So do you want to just start with the numbers? I think that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So, on the varsity side of things, we go out there and we directly recruit across the country and internationally, just like you might find your football team or your basketball team or your soccer team doing. I've got 3 full-time professionals who, a large part of their job is recruiting directly for the program. A lot of the numbers there end up coming directly from those recruits. Now, that doesn't mean our varsity teams are quite that large. We have about 45 students that are on our premier varsity teams. So they're the ones out there representing the university. They're the ones out there winning national championships. They're the one you're going to see on Twitch on the front of the website. And then we have another about 140 students or so that participate on our JV teams. Those students have come to Akron directly for the esports program and have been recruited to do so. Many of them have the interest in going into that next level of varsity programming maybe in a year or two, so that we let them try out again. Maybe they make the team the next year. About 650 of that number is in our club program. Some of them have been in contact with our recruiting team, but a lot of them are just naturally here in Akron. A lot of them compete in different games. So there's about 60 different game titles that our club competes in. You name it, they're probably competing in it. It's a single player game, it's a multiplayer game, it's a console game, it's a PC game, it's a phone game. They're competing in just about everything. And then the remaining 1,400, that's our club on campus. So that's students that are coming to events, that's students who are going to different esports activations and activities on campus using the facilities. It is about 20% of the overall population at Akron, which is right about where you should see most gaming populations stand. You're going to get about 65, 70% of the campus identify as gamers, and about half of those are going to engage with the program that you have. On the game side of things, so we offer 7 different games at the varsity level. Those 3, Rocket League, Rainbow Six Siege, and Fortnite, are probably our 3 strongest. We've won about 45 national titles over the last 7 years. The players who are on those teams can win significant amounts of money through those games as well. The other titles that we offer at the varsity level are Super Smash Brothers, Valorant, Overwatch, and Call of Duty, rounding out the 7. And for the club teams, obviously, there's like 60 different ones that I mentioned. You name it, they're probably playing it. And then the scholarship side of things, we do offer about a 25% scholarship for those students that are on our top varsity teams. And then each year we have scholarships available and or work available and or work study available for students that are interested in esports. So I've got about 65 right now, actually, that are on my employment roster for event management, broadcasting, shoutcasting, social media, video editing, graphic design, all the different things that are surrounding making an esports event happen, because about 15 to 20 times a year we're hosting events on campus. Some of these are smaller scale, some of these are larger scale, and the students are the ones that are on the ground getting that experience doing it.
That's great. One of the questions that I had was about recruiting, which you answered, but I kind of want to ask, tailing off of that scholarships question and how you're mentioning like work study, and you have students that are involved in all aspects of esports, not just being competitive players, but with the social media, the marketing. Do you find that a lot of your students, maybe on the competitive side or just, on the work study or work side, are they trending to be in a particular major? Are they like computer science majors, or are they like digital media and design, or are they kind of across the board?
Not really. As it is right now, the number that you mentioned with the industry for esports, it's certainly growing. There's money there, but that hasn't necessarily translated into jobs for students that are studying esports. A lot of the students that we get, they're studying something traditional. So they might be studying engineering, or they might be studying computer science or communications, and then they're using that interest that they have in esports as a way to maybe open some doors for them down the line. There are a lot of jobs that we're seeing that are the students are getting hired to manage the front aspect of a football team or something like that, and then they are being asked to do esports on the side because they have that knowledge. So it's really helping them get into the door, not necessarily the reason for them getting the job, though.
Okay. All right. That's fair enough. And then also you mentioned some of your top games, and you said that there were 7 at the varsity level, but then 60 that, were kind of across the board.
Sure.
How do you decide, or how does a college decide what games are going to be the ones that they're going to be playing competitively? And I know, again, through my research was that there are some tiers of games. So do you mind just explaining how you pick the games and then what the tiers are?
Yeah, sure. So, a lot of times you'll hear the term tier one esport, and a lot of the times really what they're referring to is the games that have a lot of support from the developer side of things. So typically that's going to be your League of Legends, it's going to be Valorant. It would have been Overwatch if you asked me a couple years ago, maybe not so much anymore. It's games like Counter-Strike. We don't support all those games at the college level, though. It's a little bit different. So a game like Counter-Strike, for instance, is not very large at the college level, and it's not a game that we support, even though I don't think you'd find anyone that wouldn't consider it a tier one esport. For us, a lot of it is about the leagues that have been developed at the college level and what they support and what we're able to play in. So, for instance, Glenn and us, we're both in the MAC conference, right? The Mid American Conference. We have an esports league. The esports league encompasses 4 different titles: Valorant, Rocket League, Overwatch, League of Legends, and we're adding Smash in the next year too. So those become what our tier one esports are, kind of following along with what that college scene demands. Really, that comes from 2 different things. It comes from the game developer support, and then it also comes from the interest in the student body. And we look at students throughout Northeast Ohio, throughout the Midwest, look at the numbers for the high school leagues. Those high school leagues, Ohio last year had 3,500 students in the high school league. We look at that to try and determine how are we going to add a esport, what is it going to look like, and then how we can manage it and what leagues are available as well.
That's so interesting. I guess I just assumed it was going to be based on popularity, but the first thing that you said was just the support from the developer, which was
Yeah,
not where I thought that was going to go. So very interesting. That's really, really great. So thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate your input and for all this insight. It was wonderful.
no problem. Thank you.
All right, so we are going to move on to the opposite part of Ohio, down to the southwest corner with Miami University. So, Glenn, you were highly recommended to me actually through our IECA, which is the Independent Educational Consultant Association. You had done a podcast with someone else in my organization, and they were like,
All
"You have to
right.
have an wasn't on there. So I'm so glad that you were open to being on our webinar as well. But I listened to your TED Talk. It was incredible. Again, such a wonderful insight into the world of esports and just kind of like the market share and some of the stereotypes. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about that, but I'll do that right after I quickly debrief on your slide. But Miami University has JV, varsity, and club level esport, approximately 80 students. Similar to Akron, there's Valorant, Overwatch, Smash, that's Smash Brothers, and League of Legends. And then there are scholarships available at Miami as well, so approximately $150,000 to allocate. And again, I'll have you explain how that is allocated. Anything on this slide that you kind of want to tell us more about that you think is important, Glenn?
A couple. I think on the number of students, our number of students actually looks a lot like Akron's. And I think it's important to note because I think it's one of the unique things about esports is that kind of breadth of engagement. So like on our varsity team at the moment, I think we're getting close to about 60 students who are on the varsity team. But then on the club team, we're looking at 700 students, not all that dissimilar from Akron. And then the percentages that Nate was talking about that engage with our esports arena or come to events, and I saw Sam nodding as well. I think those kind of percentages across the university are pretty similar at most schools. And I think that scale is just of note, right? Because while I think we all look at universities who have like great football programs and lots of people are fans of those football programs, very few of those people actually played football, and certainly not at that level. And esports is a very different type of sport that way, and that the fan base very much are active players. I mean, depending on what stat you look at, half of all esports fans are playing esports at some level of significance. And so the numbers are really staggeringly big. And for 34-year-olds and younger right now, this is their sport. They watch more of the sport than other traditional sports combined. And so I just wanted to comment on the number because 80 feels remarkably low. And I think it's sort of the context of the question when I was answering. And I think all three of us actually have fairly similar numbers that way. Our top games, we've been expanding a lot of the same sort of issues that Nate brought up, that it's a moving target. Like there is only one game of football, but there are a lot of games of esports, right? There are, as Nate mentioned, I want to say an infinite number, but there certainly are hundreds of games that could be esports. And the ones that get played are very much driven by that marketplace. I think one thing I do want to emphasize is high school competitive esports does a lot to drive what's played at the collegiate level, just because we're recruiting from high school. And that's to a large extent why you don't tend to see first-person shooter games so much at the collegiate level, because high schools tend to avoid those. So anyway, that's the only sort of coloring I would put on some of these numbers.
Okay, perfect. So I want to touch a little bit about some of the topics that were on your TED Talk, and maybe when we send this out, we can actually send that link out because it was fantastic. But it was intriguing to me, and I talked about it a little bit on one of the earlier slides, just like the attributes that esports athletes obtain or already attain when they're participating in this. And you mentioned things like mental sharpness, reaction time, elevated cortisol, heart rate. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I guess that we think of, again, for the novice video game player, like you have to be really, really skilled to be good at this. And I feel like that is the case in anything. But again, some of just like the physical attributes or the mental attributes that come with being a successful esports player. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think again, it's that interesting space that it lives in that's kind of like traditional sports and kind of not like traditional sports. So the initial reaction you often get when you're in this space is, oh, wait a minute, my son plays video games all day long. Like he could get a scholarship at your school. And it's kind of like saying, like, you play football with your buddies, couldn't you get an Ohio State scholarship? I mean, professional esports players and sort of high level varsity players have exceptional sets of skills. Like it is not just that they play and they're really good at it. That same sort of more than human type of skills that you see with a LeBron James or, with any sort of great football player or hockey player. The same thing occurs in esports. So the very top tier folks have some of these things you were mentioning, right? That there have been studies about reaction time, and both choice reaction time and actual reaction time for professional esports players. They're sort of on par with professional like football players, or even faster. There, I mean, and significantly above the average. They have ridiculously fast reaction times, faster reaction times than fighter pilots do as an average, like by a magnitude. Cortisol levels you mentioned. There was a study about cortisol levels that found they had cortisol levels similar to fighter pilots, to race car drivers. It was race car drivers. And and the sets of things that they're doing are like I said, almost superhuman. Games like StarCraft that are incredibly complicated esports. You have players that are taking, by some measures, as many as 60 individual actions in a minute, right? And they're just zooming through each hand doing a different thing and reacting to things that are happening on the screen and making strategic decisions based on those. And so being in that sort of upper echelon is exceptionally difficult. But by the same token, being competitive enough to play a good game, to be part of a club team, to be part of a JV team, that is kind of a walk-on skill set. And so players can, it's not like you have to be the best of the best of the best to play at the collegiate level. A lot of that kind of walk-on activity happens with folks that are just really, really good at it. And so I think there's two different stories that you can tell there, but without a doubt, the best professional and varsity collegiate esports players have skills that are like blow your mind, unbelievable reaction times.
That's awesome. A lot of respect for those people too. Probably doesn't get as much respect as it deserves, to be honest. So
yeah, there's a fair amount. I'm sure Sam and Nate will sort of nod as I say it, but like, there's a constant battle of, oh, wait a minute, people pay to watch people to play video games. Like, how do you call this a sport? We're constantly having to defend the fact that this is a sport. And given that that's Sam's expertise, I'm going to let him talk about that more. But I think it's certainly one of the things we're constantly battling.
yeah. And speaking of maybe like overcoming stereotypes or different roles, can you talk a little bit about the gender disparity? Or maybe there isn't a gender disparity, like the gender roles in esports. I think most people probably think, oh, this is a bunch of guys and they're sitting around like, but the women can play too.
The women do and can play. That said, I mean, there's a significant gender disparity at the professional level. I think pro esports has a gender problem, and I don't think it's working quite hard enough to fix that problem. The top 10 professional esports players who are women are paid a fraction of what the top 10 professional esports players are who are men. And there's no sort of physical reason why that should be the case, right? As there might be in other sports. So I think part of that is slowly being fixed. I think part of that is the responsibility of collegiate. I think it's our job to help lay that groundwork for gender equity in esports. And I think at the collegiate level that we are doing that. I think we see that at a lot of universities, sort of active recruiting. All that said, at our school, for example, our non-player, we do have female players on our varsity team. It's not a majority. It's not even half, which is what it ought to be. But in that back office role, so in the streaming teams and the graphic design teams and all of those roles that sort of work behind the scenes in the office for esports that Nate was talking about, we actually have more women in those roles than men. And in fandom, if you look at fans of esports, there's a lot more equity in that fan base as well. So I think this is a problem that's on its way to be fixed, but at the professional level, it isn't quite there yet.
Yeah. And like you said, I think just bringing awareness to it is the first component of really overcoming that. And I'm appreciative that you all are doing that and making that, some of your goals to really make it a little bit more equitable in that space. So that's great. And then my last question for you, and again, kind of rolling right off that last topic that you had mentioned is, can you just speak to the growth of esports? Like we mentioned in that statistic, was it like 2.3 billion to 16 point some billion in a 10-year span? That's the growth and the viewership. So can you just talk to the explosive growth of esports?
I feel like I'm being such an academic here because I'm answering all these questions with a yes and a no. So yes, esports is growing, at a ridiculous clip. Global esports fans are, somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 million at this point. We're seeing growth rates of fandom, of 20% a year. We're seeing, massive numbers of people viewing major esports events. So like the League of Legends Worlds, which is the event that had the largest esports viewership yet, had about 7 million people watch it. So in that sense, we're seeing significant growth, a pattern of growth. There's absolutely no doubt that there's a generation coming up of which this is their sport of choice. And as they grow into having money and being able to sort of buy and support professional sports, we're going to start seeing all of sports kind of shift in that direction. I mean, the esports is going to be in the Olympics. The IOC voted unanimously to include it in the Olympics, right? So all of these are these kind of cues that it's happening. At the same time, one of the interesting challenges with esports is just the one that I began with, maybe to bring this full circle, which is there is a ton of different games in it. It's a very fractured space. And so to talk about esports with this kind of broad brushstroke is complicated because it's easy to say you've got this many fans of football, but in esports, everyone's watching different games, and each of those different games has different players, and they each have fans that are following them. And so you're not getting that aggregation of eyeballs that you get with other sports. And so comparing it to traditional sports is a bit of an apples and oranges comparison. As a collective whole, like you said, video games are a larger industry than Hollywood, music, right? Add those all up combined in video games, right, are billions of dollars more. I mean, massive industry. It's just a very fractured industry. And so when you talk about it, you have to talk about it as kind of this giant thing. And at the same time say, well, if the largest audience you had in esports was 7 million, that's kind of less than the World Series had. And then you're like, well, so maybe it's not so big, but we forget that's one game, one event. Mm-hmm. And then there was Dota, right? And there is Overwatch and Fortnite and Smash and all these different events. And if you start adding up all of those viewers, then you get to these really massive numbers. But you'll hear people say, more people watch esports than watch the Super Bowl. And that's a bit of a misleading type of statistic. Any individual sport, individual games have relatively smaller populations watching them, but as a whole, like I said, there is no doubt that this is going to be the sport of choice for this generation as it ages.
That's great. Yep, you definitely brought it full circle. So thank you for that. That was wonderful. All right. Last but not least, let's move over to Sacred Heart University and Sam Shelfout. So Sam's going to talk a little bit about a club opportunity. So not a varsity opportunity. He's going to talk about their league that they're in. He said about 50 students that participate. And for context, Sacred Heart is much smaller than Akron and Miami. So again, just giving context there. Top games, again, we've heard a few of these already: Valorant, Overwatch, League of Legends, Rocket League, and Super Smash Brothers. And scholarships, not yet, just for fun. But I know, Sam, you mentioned in our communication that hopefully that was something that could be on the horizon. So tell us a little bit about the club setup.
Yeah, the club setup, and thank you so much for having me. And very happy to be here and talking with two very people I've wanted to meet in the esports space. So it's a great opportunity to network as well. Yeah, and Sacred Heart University, we're a smaller Catholic university in Connecticut. We've got about 8,000 students, so we're still pretty a mid-sized university. And I think our numbers reflect the same sort of situations that Glenn and Nate both tacked on. We've got about 50 varsity players, but throughout campus, we've got between 300 and 400 students who are either in our Discord, attending events, taking our classes in esports as well. And so at the club level, it's very interesting. And I also have sort of the background of an academic, just like Glenn was talking about. And so I love thinking about sort of the advantages, the disadvantages of participating at the club level. And so I think that depending on what your typical student is looking for, there's a lot. I think it's not a one size fits all approach. There's a lot of different ways you can approach it. And so at the club level, our mission for our club is to generally emphasize that anyone who is interested in participating at a varsity level or at sort of competitive level is free too. And I think that's in line with what Akron and Miami offer as well, but probably on a much smaller scale. And so we have students who are participating in a lot of different games. Those 5 on the screen right now are the ones that we participate in the I don't want to confuse it because I know Miami and Akron are in the MAC, the MAC. We also call ours the MAC too, but it's the MAC, the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, which is also a Division I athletics conference in the Northeast. And so we participate in that league that just started a couple of years ago. It's still pretty new. And so we participate in those games in the MAC. And then and to a point that I think Glenn and Nate were both talking about, the selection of games varies so much based on just what's popular at the time, what students are interested in. And so looking at this list right now, I can tell you that, and I only submitted this a couple weeks ago, but our Overwatch, League of Legends, and Rocket League teams are kind of in hiatus right now because of sort of industry trends. We now have 2 Marvel Rivals teams, a game that just came out a couple months ago, just because there's so much student interest in that game. The problem is because it's so new, there's no leagues for it. And so that's something we just have to wait on and sort of figure out. We have 4 Valorant teams. And so it's just all dependent on what students are interested in. The games that we offer are the ones that the students want to participate in. We don't have typically sort of a quota for any particular game, but it isn't sort of interesting and a little challenging to sort of reassess every semester since our seasons are on semester long basis. That, you know, what are we going to be playing essentially? So it's really interesting. And at the club level, we're underneath the umbrella of our club sports program. At Sacred Heart, our club sports program is very robust. We have, I want to say, at least over 30 teams in our club sports program. It's incredibly large. I don't want to make up numbers for that, but it's, you know, across campus, I would say nearly like 75 to 80% of students, and sorry, I might be making that number up, but it's around that number of all students on campus are participating in club sports, and club esports is, you know, a section of that. So we don't have any athletic affiliation. That's why I sort of hesitated to say we play at a varsity level, even though we do play competitive in the MAC, but also in the ECAC, which is the Eastern Collegiate Athletics Conference. I might be messing that one up as well, but they have their own esports, one of the largest esports conferences in the country as well. And yeah, and so we have a bunch of different stakeholders that have their sort of authority over the club. We have a director for campus life that oversees everything. We have our director of club sports that helps us. I'm the director of club esports, which is basically a umbrella for all the students in the organization as well. And a lot of what our club operations are also handled by the students as well. And so we have you know, multiple presidents. I think we have 2 presidents. We have a vice president. We've got, you know, treasurer, secretary, executive board. And, you know, if you want to be a club officer, whether it's, you know, in charge of production, in charge of social media, in charge of marketing, we have roles for those students. And so it kind of piggybacks what Nate goes off of as well, is that we have a lot of students that are participating in the club, not to compete, but also just to collaborate, develop community, and take the skills that they are learning in their own programs and applying it to an esports sense. And so we do that through a couple different mechanisms. We have our club esports program. We also have an academic minor here at Sacred Heart University that I teach courses for, that has, you know, more of sort of those foundational courses, the introductory courses, but also the capstone courses that culminate in putting on a large scale event. So Sacred Heart has actually hosted the Connecticut Esports Showcase for the past 5 years, which is a collegiate competition between all of the universities in the state of Connecticut in a selection of games. We broadcast that on Twitch. And so a lot of, you know, marketing skills, production skills, sponsorship, graphic design, social media, all these different skills. A lot of our students come from, a lot of different majors to apply those skills to an esports context to develop this event. And it's stressful. It's a lot, but it's also a lot of fun too. So, and then just finally a note on the scholarships as well. And this sort of is maybe a broader sort of comment too. And so Sacred Heart, we don't yet offer scholarships for esports, but with discussions between our sort of upper echelons of employees here at the university, and this might be sort of a common thread between a lot of different universities, but esports is sort of seen as perhaps this arms race where if other schools are offering scholarships, especially other schools in our conference, that makes us more inclined to want to offer those scholarships as well. And I think we're seeing that a lot at the collegiate level, where a lot of these universities are recognizing the impact that esports can have on their universities, not just on campus, but externally as well. And it's interesting to see how the mindsets of these administrators are beginning to change because their competitors are giving scholarships for esports. That forces our administrators to think, okay, well, maybe it's all an enrollment game, and in the end, a lot of universities are striving to increase enrollments, and I think esports is one of these new exciting ways to do this. So I guess I'll stop there, but we're doing a lot of cool things here at Sacred Heart.
Yeah, you make a lot of great points. I feel like the part that you make with the club sports aspect of it gives a lot of the autonomy to the students. So a lot of leadership opportunities, a lot of student drive. So, even doing things like probably setting some sort of constitution, bylaws, leadership roles, a budget. I mean, that is really, those are transferable skills that go far beyond esports, is like running a company, a corporation, managing other people, things like that. So I think that's fantastic. And then someone who I can speak to being an enrollment, because before I worked at Estrela, I had 2 roles on the admission side at Baldwin Wallace and Ohio State. And it is like they need to find very creative ways to boost enrollment. We're in the middle of a demographic cliff right now. The current senior class is the largest senior class that we'll have, and for the next 15 years, it's going to drop off. So colleges are very mindful of that they have to find other ways to entice and think outside of the box and motivate students to check into their colleges. So you're right, Sam. I mean, if they're going to have to start finding ways to incentivize and scholarship esport athletes, they're going to do it because they need the enrollment. If they can discount $2,000 for a student, but the student's going to pay the other 38 grand to go to school there, yeah, they'll toss 2 grand at them, and they'll find
Right.
maybe some donor that can help fund this for a few years, or some corporation. So that's a really good point. I also wanted to ask you too, because I feel maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Nate and Glenn are former semi-professional esport competitors, but you did note that in your biography that you did play semi-professionally. So I'd love to hear from you, just like that, about that experience, because again, beyond this, like if some students are like, this is my passion, this is my love, is there a way that I can continue doing this? And also, again, doing my research, this is a lucrative space. Like these people can make a lot of money playing esports. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and so I regret to inform everybody that I was not one of those players that made a lot of money participating in esports. My career earnings are probably around $1,000, so it wasn't extremely lucrative for me at the time, but that wasn't the primary motivation for me. Sort of just I don't want to dive too deep into my background, but I learned about esports when I was in college about 15 years ago, and my first gut reaction to esports was, this is stupid. Like, why would anybody want to watch competitive video games? And it wasn't until I went to grad school at the University of Texas at Austin, where I was at South by Southwest, of all places. Maybe I heard Glenn speak earlier as well. As you said, you mentioned you were presenting there at some point. But I was just walking around, and that was the first time I saw this game called Hearthstone. And as soon as I saw it, I was just, enamored by it. I was really interested in it, and from that day on, I was like, okay, I want to be the best at this. Like, this is my new sort of drive, right? And I think it does speak to sort of this larger sentiment that I do see in a lot of our athletes. Like, they do have that drive, they just don't know where to sort of direct it. And so we've seen a lot of our competitive esports players really thrive in this space, whereas they couldn't thrive, or they didn't know where else to thrive, essentially. before this this meeting, I was looking up researching Nate's bio, and there was a comment he made on one of the press releases that Akron put out. And I think the number was something about like 60% of students aren't involved in any of their clubs on campus other than esports, or it's something to that degree where it's like if they're going to be involved in a club, they're going to be involved in esports, right? And that was my mentality as well. So, I was a grad student at Texas, and I was part of Longhorn Gaming, which was our competitive esports club at the time. And so I have that sort of background too, like knowing that, this is, a space where I found maybe not for me a sense of purpose, but I found a community of like-minded people where I could get together and get to know these people. And I think the combination of that group, plus I had another group outside of the university, we all sort of drove each other. And so I think that really fueled my competitive sort of edge, I guess. And so I started entering, national tournaments. I had entered an international tournament as well. Not extremely successful at it, but it was still something that I was really invested in. And then it wasn't until my first year of my PhD that I was like, okay, I got to kind of settle this down. So it's interesting. And I think about all the things that I got to learn and I got to be a part of while playing esports, with a team, with leading a team too, these types of skills that you don't really consider when you enter this space, but you come out of it and these skills are transferable to no matter what you want to do, after you graduate, right? And so I think we see that with a lot of our students too. They come from not just one academic background, but several academic backgrounds, and they're learning leadership skills. They're learning how to communicate better within a team, these teamwork skills, and doing it in this academic space too, I think really is a primary motivator. You did mention that so a lot of schools have minimum GPA requirements. Ours is not that high by sort of regular sort of standards. We only require a 2.0 to maintain status within our club sort of esports, but having that drive to sort of, keep on the sort of that academic track, I think is a primary motivation for a lot of our students. And so there is, I don't know how to sort of wrap this up, but there's a lot of these types of soft skills, these types of skills that can be applied. And I think that's something that definitely helped me as I was entering the job market in academia, and all these different things I could point back on and say, oh yeah, actually, learned a lot from my time playing on the Hearthstone team at University of Texas. So it's really cool to see, and that's hopefully something we, as a director, I hope to replicate with our students as well.
Like you said, just for like we mentioned the recruitment piece of how esports is going to be such a major player in the recruitment piece for these universities, but also probably like you're just saying, Sam, retention. If you can get a student who is like not quite sure or can't quite find their people and they get locked in with esports, like that retention rate is going to be very high. And with the numbers that you've mentioned, like thousands and hundreds of kids that are getting involved in some way, that's community, that's friendship, that is something that they commit to. They're not going to really phase out of esports. Like you can do that for all 4 years. You're not going to probably get injured or get pushed off the team. And, for some students, it fills that competitive void too. So if you need that adrenaline rush, maybe you're not a partier, you can go and play esports and really like get amped up about something. So yeah, I think from a recruitment standpoint, from a retention standpoint, like esports is definitely a key component of the college experience that the administrators are probably going to be dialing into much more deeper.
Mhm.
All right, so let's see where we're at now. So any Q&A, let me double check here. I gotta get out of here. We've got it. All right, we don't have any questions in the chat, but I feel like
I wanted to jump in on something Sam started to say, and I think it's consistent among the three of us. But Alyson, you were referring to the money that can be made in professional esports, and I actually would like to downplay that. When you look at pro esports salaries, it's kind of like people come to Miami University to play football. Ben Roethlisberger went pro. That's about it. right? And most people that come to Miami University to play football end up doing something else. And even pro esports players, like I was mentioning, the top 10 pro esports players that are women, 9 of those are basically making about $100,000 a year. And so this is absolutely not about pursuing a career as a professional player per se. That would be great if you did, and I think it's aspirational. But I want to emphasize something Sam said, which is that there are esport adjacent careers galore. Everything from streaming and video production and social media and content creation and writing and team management. Like, and Nate was talking about players that graduate and work with professional sports teams. Like, to me, the career goals: you come to a university, you get a scholarship, you play as a player on that varsity team, because it starts to open all of these other doors up for you. And again, I would never dissuade anyone from seeking out a professional esports career, but I also don't want to create the false illusion that you're going to go to one of these universities. There are upwards. I know you had, I think it's a 240. Last I heard, there are 400 to 600 varsity teams in the U.S. right now. There are so many varsity players that rising to the top of that crowd, not to mention people who go straight from high school to pro, I think is a shot. It's a 1 in a million shot. But on the other hand, to be able to look for a job and say, hey, I've spent the last 4 years doing video production and streaming management for a competitive varsity team, is a foot in the door at any video production company, at anyone who does not just sports video production, but today streaming is such a critical part of everything from marketing to product management. I think those are the kind of careers that students who are in this space go into. So I just wanted to jump in on that, because I think that there's a false narrative that this is all about pursuing a career as a professional esports athlete. And I actually think that is the least likely thing that's going to happen. But it is a way to get into a university to develop these skills that are esports adjacent and then leverage those.
Yeah. It's a great point. I feel like there's a commercial out there that the NCAA does, and it's like 99% of our student athletes will go pro in something else. So kind of speaks to that too. And like, again, if it's a great way to vet out a school, to find your people, like you said, to get tangible experience in something that's adjacent to esports, and you find something else that you love through that opportunity, it's done its job. You've been successful in the collegiate esports world if that's what the end result is. So any other
Yeah,
thing?
I can help put it in perspective too a little bit, because that's a good thought from Glenn. When I mentioned we have students that have won significant amounts of money, we do, but I also have thousands and thousands and thousands of students that try out for these teams every year, and I might be taking one, maybe two. And so it at the
Yeah.
highest level. And the craziest thing is, over the past 7 years, 8 years, I guess, that I've been in it, the skill level at the college scene has gone up tremendously. When we first started our program back in 2017, yeah, you probably could have walked in off the street and played if you were half decent. Anymore though, that is absolutely not the case. And there is money to be made at the college scene, but the skill level, as Glenn was saying when he was speaking originally, they really are just as good, if not better, than the athletes we're recruiting for our football team and our basketball team at their respective games.
And
Yeah.
Nate, I was going to ask you something actually, and this is actually something that goes off of maybe what Reed. I'm open up the Q&A as well. I saw Reed has a couple of questions in here, but in the point you make is spot on. Like the scene in collegiate esports is insane, and we're actually seeing a lot of professional players go back to college. I was wondering if that was happening at Akron and Miami. It's definitely not happening at Sacred Heart, but maybe at some other levels, and how that impacts sort of how you recruit these students too.
So for us, we specifically do not recruit professional players unless they're in our backyard. I'm not calling up somebody in California and saying, hey, why don't you come to Ohio and come to Akron and study? We've had students that have done that, but for us, it has to be graduation first. I have to know that they want to do school first and then esports second. And for most of those pro players, that's not really the case. And if you look at the schools that are doing it that way, you're mostly looking at smaller D2, D3 schools, and they're not graduating, right? They're not graduating.
Yeah.
But if we have
Yeah.
a pro player in our backyard, sure, yeah, I'll contact him. We've got quite a few Rocket League players that are pro that live right down the street from us. Like, I'd be a fool not to call them, right? I can talk to their parents, go over and see, do you want to come to college? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are some schools that have questionable recruiting tactics where they'll recruit pro players who matriculate by taking, one class and are at the university for less than a year, right? Like, and nobody wants that. That's not why we're in the business here. That said, I think we've had a similar experience to Nate, where we have had a couple of people who very genuinely were like, hey, my career as a pro is over. I really want to go back and study at a university. I'm academically qualified for that. I could get into Miami anyway, right? Like that's part of what we're looking at. And we certainly wouldn't want to turn those people away. But the path to pro, I mean, we have to be realistic. The path to pro is very often straight from high school. And so there needs to be some way to go from pro back to college if that's what you want to do.
Sam, thank you for noticing Reed's Q&A. I was looking in the chat and I didn't see anything in the chat, but Reed had dropped some fantastic questions in the Q&A. So we have about 4 minutes. So let me check if there is any more that he had dropped in there. Oh, I said game over. Did you see any other Q&As from Reed that you think would be good to answer? For some reason, it's not popping back up because I think I closed it out.
Yeah, no worries. A lot of what Reed asks about recruiting, he just posted one just now. I'll read that one. So do the varsity teams have access to the same varsity sport perks as other varsity teams on campus, for some schools that might have athlete-specific gyms or tutoring, etc. as well? At the club level, that doesn't exist for us. And we're still, I should have noted earlier, we're still in the process of building our own space. So we don't have the facilities that Akron and Miami have right now. So I'll have probably Glenn and Nate could answer this question a little better than I can.
I'll let Nate answer that one.
Yeah, ours is yes. So I guess it would depend on what you mean by perks, but you get all the clothes, you get access to the facility, you've got tutoring, you've got early class registration, you've got priority dorm registration, you've got specific dorm registration if that's what you're looking for. They're not exactly the same perks, but the game is also different as well. So in some ways it's going to be better and bigger, in some ways it's going to be slightly smaller and different. But yeah, overall I'd say the perks are very, very similar to what an athlete would get, with one big exception though. And this is just maybe more where esports is right now than anything else, but anybody that we bring into Akron, I am never going to tell them you can't study XYZ because we have a practice schedule at this particular time. If you come in and you're on the basketball team, they're going to tell you when you're practicing. And if you're in XYZ engineering class, well, might not be able to take that class because of basketball practice, right? For us, it works differently. We schedule around the students' schedules rather than trying to make them schedule around us. Maybe
Yeah,
that's actually a bigger perk.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing for us. Although we don't have tutors, we don't have specific tutors. I would love to do that, but yeah, otherwise we do have. I was going to say we do have the jerseys. Here, look, there's me in the jersey. That's my badass esports picture there. But we do, yeah, we try to do it. And there's a specific arenas and that they can play in that other people can't play in on campus, that kind of thing.
That's great. Thank you, Reed. I appreciate the questions. I'm sorry I didn't see them earlier, but thanks, Sam, for being on top of that. I appreciate it. Well, thank you all so much for your time and your preparedness and just sharing your expertise with us and your experience. It was fantastic. Really appreciate, again, just your willingness to be here and spend your time with us. If you have questions, when I send out the recording, I can also add, with their permission, their contact information if you have specific questions for them, or if you want to maybe visit their universities. I'm sure we could help facilitate that as well. But thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Glenn, Sam, and Nate, for your time, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Alyson.
Thank you so much, Alyson.
Thank you, guys. Yay.